Well, Pastor John's on vacation this week, and we've just been rooting and praying that he has the best time. I love Pastor Jamel put it, yet again, he is so eloquent. I love Pastor Jamel. But he just put it, they have led us so well for the last 2 years, Pastor John and Miss Miriam, through COVID, through a building project, and we just hope they've had the best trip, and we can't wait to see him back this week. But for our series, we have a theme verse. It is Psalm 119:68, and we're finishing our series called God Is today. So it's our last chance to say it together. So prepare your voice, get ready. We're going to say it together in just 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. You are good, and what you do is good. I love when we get to say things together. It always makes me feel like, oh, I know where we're at. But our series is called God Is. And it's all about the attributes of God, basically the characteristics of who God is. And throughout this series, we've looked at a number of them, and there are more than what this series is. Like, it's trying to describe another person. There is so much that you could say, but we just hit a couple key attributes of who God is. So over the last few weeks, we've seen that God is a personal spirit, that God is love, that God is sovereign, that God is faithful, and today it's our last attribute, that God never changes. And this is exciting to me because our world is always changing. Like, I can't keep up with things if I'm looking all around me. But when we know who God is and that he doesn't change, we have a place to start building our lives from. We have a place to start experiencing God. We start having this idea in this direction of where God will lead us because he is the same. In fact, Hebrews 13:8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. That God is the same person who he was, is, and always will be. That God is never changing, that he is the same. Now, there is a fancier word for this if you wanted to talk a little more theology. It's called immutability. But that's a little pretentious, so we're going to keep with the word God never changes. But what's that exactly mean? A theologian, Wayne Grudem, defines it as this. He said, God is unchanging in his being, perfections, purposes, and promises. Yet God does act and feel emotion. And he acts and feels differently in response to different situations. Basically, God is a person who never changes at his core. His promises, his purposes, his mission, they are always the same. That if you were to look 1,000 years ago or into eternity, God will always be the same. He will never change in those areas. But God is not a machine. God can't be manipulated. He's not a math formula where if you do one thing, he will automatically do another. God is spirit. He is love. He is personality. And he reacts differently to different situations. He is always bringing something new. But he never changes. And there's something beautiful about that. Because have you ever had a friendship that doesn't change? Now, I don't mean that the friendship doesn't grow. Like, every friendship should grow, otherwise it just gets a little sad. There need to be new layers, new memories, new fun things coming into its play. But at its core, the friendship is the same. That's how I feel about my best friend, Brandon. I met him the first night I went to youth group in the 6th grade. We were wrestling on the floor in a tug-of-war battle. It was an unusual night. But he has been my best friend for the last, 18 years. We grew up together. We finished high school the same year. We went to college around the same time. We got married 2 weeks apart from each other, went to Jamaica on our honeymoon, different weeks, but both to the same island, had our firstborn kid within 5 months of each other, and both of them were sons. It's like when I started going through the similarities and our life experiences, it got a little weird in my mind. It felt like a horror movie. It was like, what's happening here? But he lives in Florida now, and we don't get to see each other every so often. But last year, we were down for his brother's wedding, and we went to Hollywood Studios, which was amazing. The Star Wars land in there, The Rise of the Resistance, is out of this world. It is, believe the hype if you are going to Disney. And we've got just a picture here. It was my wife, and then Brandon, and then his wife, Jess. They're just awesome people. But we were staying at their house a little bit away from Disney. And within a few hours of being there, he asked me the question that I knew was going to come and that I had been looking forward to for months. He asked, do you want to play a video game? Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2005 edition. That sounds ridiculous, but this video game has been in our friendship for 18 years. And if you're a millennial, this is like a millennial thing. But if you're a little bit older, that is my Frogger, that is my Pong, that is my Space Invaders. If you're younger and you don't know what I just even said there, that's like, are you speaking a foreign language? That's my Fortnite, that's my Roblox, that's my Call of Duty. That game, it is older than many of us. It is 18 years old, and we played. And it's beautiful because there is a part of our friendship that is pure and has never changed. It's at the core of who we are as friends. It's beautiful. It's stable. I know what our future is going to be like. I'll be playing that in retirement. It's a big deal, though, to have something in your life that never changes because our world is really changing. I'm not even talking about the big changes, the things that we get stressed about, but I'm talking about the daily changes. The gas prices are crazy. One day you feel like you're rich and you could burn a $100 bill as you're filling up your tank, and the next day you feel like you're panhandling. Or maybe you're like me, you master a game or an app, you finally learn how to use Microsoft Word, and then an update comes and you don't know what you're doing again. It's terrible. Or maybe you finally master where your kid should be dropped off at, you learn the teacher's name, and then you realize the school year's over and they're going to no school, and all of this is starting over again. Change can be tough. And I actually like change. I love improvement. I love things developing. But even then, it can be overwhelming. So how do we keep up? How do we feel adequate? How do we just keep on moving forward? Well, we have to look to what we long for. And we long for a God that never changes. We long for something more. We long for God to be the person that is the same yesterday and today and tomorrow. We long for God who promises to be with us and to be unchanging in a world that is ever changing. And that's our message today, that God never changes. And we see it in one of the great stories of faith in the Bible, with the story of Moses. Now, Moses is one of the most important characters in all the Bible. And if you've been in the Bible in the year plan, you've read through Moses' story, but he pops back up again and again. This guy is name dropped everywhere for good reason. He's the person that wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. He led the nation of Israel out of slavery through the desert for 40 years and right to the edge of the promised land. He did not quite make it into the promised land. But all of this started with a single encounter with God one day while taking care of his father-in-law's flock. Let's take a look this morning at Exodus. That's the second book of the Bible, chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It says this. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So Moses' days started off pretty normal. He went out to take care of his animals. He was looking after the flock. Maybe it was sheep, goats, camels. It doesn't say. I personally like imagining that it's sheep just because that's kind of like the biblical picture. It sounds adorable. And I'm a person that's actually super interested in farming. I want to know all the details about it. Actually, when Pastor Jermel started getting his chickens, I read a book about it. It's called How to Raise Buff Orpington Chickens. I'm all in on this like lifestyle. I want to live on a farm one day. But one thing I've learned about farming and being a shepherd in particular is it's pretty boring. Like you're busy, you are working the whole day. Like there's no question about the work ethic, but it's not exactly exciting work. It's routine. Not a lot changes except maybe choosing what sheep you're going to have for dinner. It's the same. It's reality. So when Moses comes out, he has to be pretty shocked all of a sudden when he sees a bush that wasn't burning down. That's going to spice up your whole day. You got to be wondering what's going on here. So he goes and explores, and then he hears a voice. Now, usually this is a bad sign. Most of us talk to ourselves, but if you hear the voice back, it's not a good thing. You don't want that. But in this case, it's very different. It's God calling to Moses. He is yelling out, Moses, Moses, Moses. And Moses responds, Here I am. And God tells him, This is holy ground. And prepare to encounter me, the unchanging God. He tells Moses that I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And right here, God's kind of referencing Moses' ancestors, kind of the pioneers of faith. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they led God's people out of a far country and into the promised land originally. They were the first people to pursue God. It had happened hundreds of years ago, and now God is speaking to Moses and saying, I was with them, and I am going to be with you now. The same thing that occurred in the past is going to start here. And Moses responds in the only way that he could, in the only way that made sense. He got on his knees before God and humbled himself. Because when we start encountering the unchanging God, when we start encountering God who speaks to us, who has promised to be with us in the past and will be with us in the future, the only way to come before God is in humility. We don't come with answers. We come to be told who God is, to say, God, what is your will in my life? And that leads us to what we experience God. Because God never changes, we start seeing that God is consistent. Now, consistency is a big deal, and God is nothing if not consistent. And God's consistency speaks to Moses here. It's literally how God introduces himself to Moses, because God goes through the family history. He says, I was with your ancestor Abraham. I brought him from a country far away, brought him into the promised land, and had him have a kid when he was about 100 years old. I provided for him when everything seemed impossible. I was with his son Isaac, where he wasn't able to have kids, but I provided a family again for him. I provided wealth. And I was with his son Jacob, where Jacob lived a crazy lifestyle. He ran away from home, came back to home at a certain point. He thought one of his kids was dead, but turned out to not be dead. He led his family into Egypt, and I was with him through a life full of issues. God is telling Moses, I was their God, and I led them through every adventure. I kept my promises again and again to them, and I am your God now, and I will keep faithful with those promises. I am the same God now that I've always been. Because God never changes, God is consistent. And that speaks to us, because consistency is important. We all know that. You know, we talk about like breakthroughs and innovation, and that's super important, no doubt about it. But if you want to become great at something, if you want to develop, you have to be consistent. You have to put in the time and practice. You have to develop methods and routines that get you there. If you cook, you know what I'm talking about. You know how important consistency is, because there might be a day where you make a great dish, that cake was perfect, it had the right amount of moisture, the icing was just shaped so. But now there's an expectation. It's only great if you could do it again. It's why we all secretly are angry at our grandparents. You know what I'm talking about. Grandma had these recipes. She had this innate sense of cooking where if she could just add a sprinkle of salt or a little bit of something over here, it would turn out perfect. But they never wrote down a recipe, and we don't know how to reproduce their results. We're on the opposite end. We want to know everything down to the teaspoon of salt and the milligram of paprika so our food turns out consistent. That's why I love my dad, for many reasons too. But his recipes are exact. Everything is broken down to the gram. I know I could reproduce his results again and again. And actually, I've got a picture of his scones from the other week. It was amazing. He is a great cook. But it's not because he could do it one-off. It's because it's consistent. If I go to get dinner at his place, I know I will get a great dinner every time. Consistency is important. If you coach a team, you know consistency is important. An all-star player is great. Somebody that could put up a great game every now and then, huge, could change the season. But you don't build your team on that. You need talent that comes again week after week. You need the classics. You need a Derek Jeter, a Tiger Woods, and I hate to say it, but I'm not an actual sports fan, so I don't care. You need a Tom Brady, somebody that reproduces results again and again. Consistency is important. If you're in a relationship, if you're dating somebody, maybe you got married, there's a time where it moves from being just a feeling. You need consistency. You need to know this person isn't going to walk out on you. That's why when we talk about marriage and how important it is and the emphasis on giving your life to another, it's so significant because consistency is what a relationship is built on. It actually mirrors our relationship with God. Consistency matters. And God is more consistent than a recipe, player, or partner. And that is consistency you could build your life on. It's something that gives you this ability to take great risks. Because when you serve a God who doesn't change, who is consistently there for you, whose character is consistent, who doesn't change with popular opinion, you are able to start taking great steps of faith because you know you have this firm foundation that's not changing. You could start making some moves because you know that God will lead you through, that He will be faithful. It leads us to a place of vulnerability. You could say, God, are you really calling me to tithe? To sacrifice 10% of my income to glorify your kingdom? To give it back to you? God, are you calling me to serve? Are you calling me to help on Friday nights middle school? To give up my Friday night each week so that others could hear about Jesus for our youth students? God, are you calling me to be ethical at work? My boss is doing some sketchy stuff and I could just look the other way, but are you actually calling me to be vulnerable, to take a risk, to do the right thing? God calls us to take steps of faith. And it's a big deal because these little steps add up. Who we are in the micro details expands to our character on the whole because the little things show who we are becoming. And it's with our relationship with God, the small things matter. You know, God's been convicting me on a small detail, but it's consistent. He says, Adam, don't miss out with your time with your son Seth. More bluntly, because sometimes we sugarcoat what that means. He's telling me, put down your cell phone. Stop checking your email. Get off Instagram where you're just mindlessly scrolling. You are missing out on the minutes. It might have only been a minute on your phone, but maybe that was the only minute you had for a few hours with your son. Don't waste that time because my relationship with him is important, not only for us interpersonally, but who else is going to mirror God's relationship with him? If I don't spend that time, he will miss out. It's a job, it's an obligation, but it's so much more. It speaks to the very soul. Our consistency is key, and it causes us to take steps of faith. We take these small steps, but at the same time, so huge of steps, because we are serving a God who is consistent, who doesn't change, who will never back down, and invites us into this relationship where we could worship him and say, we could build our life on him. Later on, we'll get a chance to worship at the altar and say, God, we will build our foundation on you. We are giving you our all. And that's what Moses is encountering in this moment. He was being invited into this new relationship with God, and God was going to change everything in him in this process. Now, God might be changeless. God never changes. But when we do start encountering our relationship with God, God does change us. And it brings us to our second point today. Because God never changes, God is present. He is active and with us. He is with us alongside us wherever we go. So Moses continues this conversation with God. It's probably not how he expected his day to be going, but God starts speaking to Moses about their situation. He says, starting in verse 9, "And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you. And this will be the sign that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." And Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who am." That is what you are to tell the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." So God tells Moses right there, I have heard the issues my people have had in Egypt. They are slaves there. Their condition is not good. They are being treated poorly. They are being treated oppressively. And it is time they get out. And guess what? You are the leader. Moses gets drafted. There's a theologian, John Goldingay, and he says most of God's great leaders in the Bible, they don't choose God willingly. God gets in their life and says, you're doing this. You don't have a lot of options. You are in it to win it. And this brought up some terrible memories for Moses because he did not want to go back to Egypt. Now, Moses was Jewish. He was a Hebrew by birth, but he had been raised in Pharaoh's household. He had some conflicting loyalties. And at one point, he had actually murdered an Egyptian for hurting another Hebrew. It's very confusing. He was wanted for murder, and he ran away. It's how he ended up in a land far from home. But God was telling him, it's time to go back. You've been working here as a shepherd, and now you're getting a new assignment. So he asks, what do I do? God's response is simple. He says, I will be with you. In fact, God tells him the name as proof. God says, my name is I am who am. God here is saying, I am all that you will ever need. Because I am who am, when you kind of translate it, it's not translatable in some ways, but it's more of this sense. It's this sense that God is present, that he is active in our lives, that he isn't the God of like money, the God of beauty, the God of power, the God of an object, but that God is working and being present and near, that he is active in our lives, that he is a friend, that he is spirit in and around us. And it's this direct answer to Moses' question, who am I, God, to lead this people? And God answers, Moses, your question isn't bad, but instead focus on something bigger. It's not about who you are, but about who I am is. It's about who the unchanging God is. Because God never changes, he is present. He is God here with us. And that is needed because we need God's presence in our life. Having somebody with you, having somebody near you and alongside of you, it's everything. We live in a world right now that is factually more lonely and isolated than ever before. Loneliness and isolation are actually so powerful that in the United Kingdom, that's a fancy way for England, I don't understand their government structure still, there's actually a government position called the Minister of Loneliness. Just thinking through it, if you're a parent and you tell somebody at a dinner party that my child is the minister of loneliness in the country, how do you brag about that? That sounds like the worst job title in the world. It's so depressing. But their job is to build social connections in the country. And this was happening before COVID. This job has been around for about 7 or 8 years because the country has recognized that loneliness and isolation actually are a plague on the human soul. They destroy our relationship with others, and it leads people to dying younger. It increases our mortality ratio. It's so significant, it breaks us down. The feelings of fear, isolation, feeling unwanted, forgotten, neglected, they are plagues on our soul. And the reality is that no job, no government position, relationship, or mission can fully solve them. Even the most purpose-filled and meaningful life can feel empty and weak. And Moses was in that position. He was in a spot where he felt unqualified and uncertain. He was isolated from his family in a land far away from Egypt. He felt all he could do was be the shepherd, take care of these animals, that he wasn't ready or willing to go on this bigger mission for God. But God never changes. He is present. He is God with us. And God calls to Moses and tells him, it is time to get back to work. Your mission isn't done. God is present and active with us. And it's this encouragement and strength to keep moving forward. And this speaks to us because if you're here today, if you're feeling discouraged, there is hope in Jesus because we have this God who is with us through good times, through bad times, and everything in between. And we know life's not easy. God's a realist. There is nothing in the Bible that ever portrays that everything is perfect, that is everything the way that we want it to be. Challenges happen. You know, we face challenges to the left. We have issues with money, the economy, unpredictability. One day you're rich, the next day you're poor, then you're somewhere in between. Face challenges on the right. If your family is sick, there's issues, people are fighting, they're angry. And then you look around the world around you and there's politicians angrily arguing and you don't know who's right about anything. We live in a crazy world, a world full of challenges. We don't have easy lives, but God makes a promise. And that promise is not that things will be easy. Pastor John has said it multiple times. He doesn't feel like God is giving us the easy stuff. In fact, he feels like God is calling us to do difficult things, to take on difficult tasks. And that's biblical because God never promises an easy life. He doesn't give us this crazy prosperity gospel promise where we drive Teslas and have butlers. I would love both of those things, but that's not always the promise of God. God promises something better though. He promises to be with us. I am God with us. God with us when we're suffering and we don't know why. God with us when we are worried for our kids. God with us when we just don't want things to get worse and hopefully just stay the same. God never changes. He is with us, God present. And we see this so clearly with Jesus. Jesus' name literally means God with us, Emmanuel. It's why we celebrate Christmas as this celebration not only of God coming to save the world, but the promise that God is with us in every single way along the way. Every detail of our lives, God gets to experience. And Jesus is with us today. God never changes. He is present right here, right now. Because God never changes, God is consistent. Because God never changes, He is present. And because God never changes, God is able. Our God does not get weaker with old age. There is no time and never will be a time when God is not in His rightful place as king over all creation. God is able. And Moses' story continues. And it is a powerful mention, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But God shows He is able again and again. We're going to get a chance to worship at the end of the service, and it is a chance to say, God, we know You are able. Do it in our lives as well. God tells Moses, starting in verse 16, go, assemble the elders of Israel, and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I've watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. And after that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go out empty-handed. And then a few chapters later, he reaffirms this promise. God says, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. This conversation continues, and God tells Moses, go back to Egypt. Go get the Israelites, the Hebrews, and tell them it's time to pack it up. You're going to the promised land. You've just got one issue. Pharaoh's not going to want to let you go. You're valuable to him. He doesn't want to lose his labor crew. But don't worry about that. I'm going to compel him to let you go. I am able. You might be slaves today, but soon you're going to be in a new land. You are my people, and I am your God. I'm going to lead you home. There might be enemies in that land. I'm going to take care of them for you. You might have to take a journey there. I'm going to be with you. And you're not going to go out poor. They're going to pay you the back wages for working as slaves for all these years. They are going to give you cash money as you leave. God is able. And God was getting Moses ready to go. He was prepping him. God had been working on Moses for all these years, and God had shown Moses that he's consistent, that he was present, and now God was going to do something simple. He was going to show that he is able, that there is nothing our God can't do. And because God never changes, God is able. He never loses his strength. He never loses his sovereignty, his power. He is never not present. He is ready to go. He is able. And when God is able, things change. Because we don't follow a God who does nothing, who sits up there pie in the sky waiting for us to arrive in eternity. We follow a God who does all things, who is present and active in our lives. Now, this brings up a challenge, and if you've been around the church, you might have heard of this before. Kind of brings up some extremes, some weird groups of Christian thought. There's this one group on the site called Name It, Claim It. They overhype what God does. Kind of basically say that God is like our butler. He's our servant. That if you just pray hard enough, that if you believe hard enough, God will do whatever you need. It's kind of like what people call when they say manifesting things. Basically, God's their wishing factory. It's not how God works. God is able, but he is in no way our servant. God is not here to fulfill our whims. God is able to do whatever he wants. He is free. But it's to further his purposes, not to make us comfortable, not to feed our materialism. God is able to lead us to his salvation. That is his purpose and his aim for being in our lives. On the other hand, there's another group too that's equally dangerous. They sit around and think that God doesn't really care about us, that God isn't going to hear our prayers, or, there are big issues to be dealt with, that God doesn't care about what's happening in our day-to-day lives. Well, that's pointedly not true. Jesus tells us, ask, seek, and knock. He tells us to pursue God in prayer constantly over the details of our lives. Jesus challenges us to consistently come before God and say, God, you'll care for us. And Jesus shows us God is able, that he's ready to act. Now, God's not our wish factory. He's not Chick-fil-A, but he is the God who could do all things. Perhaps the issue we have is that we lose sight that God is able, that he never changes, that he's capable of handling all things. And I would say the greater danger that we have is that we ask God for too little. And I'm not talking about the new beach house or something like that. But what about believing for things that are right tied into God's purposes, something way harder than something to just get? What about believing God that a child who has been running from home will return back? What about believing that God could provide healing? Maybe it's through a doctor, maybe it's through a miracle, whatever it is, that God could bring a life-changing experience. What about believing and asking God that he could lead the family through challenges, that he could heal relationships that have been broken? Maybe we need to be asking God to do more things, just things that are aligned with the will of God, of bringing people back together and bringing us into a relationship with him. God is able. He never changes. And because he never changes, he could do all things. His purposes and plans, they're beyond what we can imagine. And the beauty is when we start seeing that God sets things in motion, he keeps them in motion. Because God is consistent again and again. He is present. He is active. He achieves his purposes. And Moses encountered this in this moment with God, and it prepared him for 40 years of leading the people through the desert. God never changes. So today, as we get ready to finish, how do we apply this? It's kind of an abstract concept, It's this whole message, it's philosophical in some ways. Like, how does it matter that God never changes? Well, God's character and his person, they stay the same across all eternity. But God is personal. He responds to us, each of us, uniquely in really different ways. But when we apply it, we see something powerful. Because God never changes, we are changed. God is stable, so we could be changed. Right now I'm seeing this with my son Seth, and he's looking for something stable. And I'm not talking about like relationships. He is looking for the floor. I'm a newish father, and I talk about it a lot, probably to a fault, but it's because my son has wrecked me. I've always been kind of non-emotional. It takes, not like in an ultra-masculine, hard way. Nobody's ever thought that about me. But in a way that I just don't feel a lot. It takes a lot to get a rise out of me. I'm a stable person. I'm calm. But Seth, he's just rocking my insides every day. Like I'll see a cute little baby and I'll just melt. It's terrible. But he's trying to stand right now. He's completely uninterested in crawling. It's super weird. He's just wants to skip that step. He wants to stand. He wants to be a little adult. He wants to grow up. I love everything about it. But he's going through this motion because he'll start on the floor, he'll roll over, get to the lineman position, and squat. But then he'll fall over. And we found out there was a problem. We had him on these blankets and these pads, but it kept shifting beneath him. So when he would get to that next step, it would slide. He wasn't just trying to learn to stand, he was trying to learn to ice skate as the beginning steps of life. It was terrible. He was hurting himself, and I'm there worried about the head injury, but also kind of laughing. It's terrible. So we made a solution. He needed a firm foundation. He needed traction control. So we went to Target. We got these foam workout pads so he could try to stand, and if he falls, it won't hurt too bad. But when we get there, we see that everything changes for him because now all of a sudden something's different. He still starts on the ground. He rolls over. He gets to lineman position, squats, and 50% of the time, he could stand now. He can't walk. He wobbles. He's doing a balancing act, but he has made progress. He has moved forward in life, and he knows what he's doing, and it's because he has a firm foundation, something unchanging, something unmoving. And I've got a picture of it. And he did it with my hands that time, but he's been doing it on his own. This was a little older. His whole life is different because he knew what to put his life on. We begin to understand and experience God differently when we know that our life is built on him. When God is never changing, we have this option and this idea of where we are going. We know how to build our lives. We have something to stand on. Today, as we close, can we stand together? Our hearts long for something unchanging, something we could build our lives on. But more specifically, we long for someone who is unchanging, someone who is consistent, present, and able. We long for God. And God invites us to build our lives on Him, to let Him be the firm foundation of our lives. And Jesus said in one of His parables in Matthew chapter 7, He said, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock." Today, as we get to finish, we have a simple option to say, God, will you be our firm foundation? Will you be our unchanging God who is with us yesterday, today, and forever? In a world full of uncertainty, God, can you do this for us? And it's not fear-mongering. We aren't supposed to be afraid. We have God who is with us. But there is something about making a commitment to God, to saying, God, I know that you will never leave me, that you will never forsake me. And today, as our worship team leads us in a final song, can we make our altar a place of where we are simply saying, God, we are committing our lives to you. We are saying that you are our firm foundation, maybe the first time, or a recommitment, or just saying, I want to keep building my life on you. Because when we know who God is, He could guide us. Today, as we close in worship, can we make our altar that place of worship, of saying, God, you are my God, and you will be the same God now. You are our firm foundation.
Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your faithfulness. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you. Oh rock of ages. Oh rock of ages. I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your faithfulness. Oh God, my God. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Oh rock of ages, I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your faithfulness. You heard the children and you hear your children now. You are the same God. You are the same God. You answered praise back then, and you will answer now. You are the same God. You are the same God. You were providing then. You are providing now. You are the same God. You are the same God. You move in power now. God move in power. You are now. The same God. You are the same God. You are the same God. You were a healer then. You are a healer now. You are the same God. You are the same God. You were a Savior then. You are a Savior now. You are the same God. You are the same God. Oh God, my God, I need you. Oh God, my God, I need you now. How I need you now. Rock of ages. Oh rock of ages. I'm standing on your faithfulness. On your faithfulness.
When we have an unchanging God, we have a firm foundation. And that's the beauty of unchangingness. It's not that God doesn't keep up. It's not that he doesn't speak to or change us. It's just we know where we're going. We're able to answer questions and navigate new things going on because we have a God who is present, who is able, who will never abandon us and never leave us and never forsake us. And that is so beautiful, and it is so changing. And when we intone that God is the one that gives the final say in our life, everything can change. Today, let's close in prayer, and then we just have a few next steps. Jesus, we are so grateful for all that you've done in our church. Help us to build our lives on you. Show us what's next. Lead us into your will and your way. God, right now, I pray that we make you the firm foundation of our lives, that everything we do is based on you. God, speak to our souls. God, I pray for healthy conviction that in areas where we are not living according to your word, you challenge and change us. God, I pray for the encouragement that only can come from you, where we know we're struggling, that you give us the strength to change, and better yet, you change us. God, we pray all these things and trust that you will be our God now and forevermore. In your name, Jesus, amen. Amen. Well, we do have a few next steps today. First, we want to just remind you that this Wednesday, we have a little bit of a change up. We have our annual vision and business meeting. It's this Wednesday night, and everybody is welcome, but to vote, you have to be a member. We would ask you prioritize this night out to be here. Second, we just want to encourage you, invite a friend. Next weekend is Palm Sunday. Easter's coming up, Good Friday. Make this a special time of where we're really focusing in on the core of our faith. There's a time to invite a friend in the next couple months. It's this series of weekends. Let's pray this prayer of blessing together today. Can we raise our hands together? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen. We hope you have a great week today. Hey, thanks for being in church today. We can't wait to see you later on. Make some good choices. Bye now.